Do you crave better self-esteem and confidence, but struggle to silence your anxiety, fears, and insecurities? If so, welcome to the sisterhood of fellow travelers on the path to reclaiming their self-confidence and happiness. I'm Jennifer DeBellis, award-winning author, speaker, and assault survivor. I spent the past few decades helping young women like you overcome fear, self-doubt, and trauma to reclaim their joy and self-worth. I cannot wait to share the secrets I learned on my own healing journey and help you restore your inner warrior as I show you the skills and tools you need to save your own broken world. If you're ready to empower your inner warrior to overcome fear, doubt, and anxiety, turn off those distractions and tune in to this episode. Today's episode is going to cover secret number 1 to rebuilding your wilderness toolkit and survival guide, which is to deal with real and perceived rejection before it buries you alive. Before we get into this episode, I'd like to take a moment to remind you to join my free Facebook community, the Restore Your Inner Warrior Sisterhood. Here's a safe space to get tips and tricks and share stories and find community support. So I hope you will find the page and join the group. Previously, we explored the 5 secrets to building and restoring your self-worth and confidence. In today's episode, we're going to dive deeper into how to cut yourself free from trying to fit yourself into spaces that others have made it very clear you are not welcome or accepted. Trust me when I say I know how real and frustrating this struggle is. Yet, I believe in you, and I want you to know that you're just steps away from adding some powerful survival skills to your toolkit that will help you protect and restore your inner peace and confidence. To do this, we'll drill deeper into some of the topics we touched on in previous episodes. Today, we'll explore the nuances of being rejected or excluded and the feelings and fears that these provoke, gain a better understanding of cause, effect, and consequences, hear personal struggles and those of some of my coaching students, learn 3 tips and tricks to help you navigate instances you feel rejected or excluded. So when it comes to interactions and relationships, we must allow people to show us where we stand and then believe what their actions reveal. So, the first thing that I think about when I think about this topic is the concept of words versus actions. So we can say things to another individual, or someone can say something to us, but if their actions do not align with those expressions, then we have to believe their actions, not their words. We have to receive the actions, and then we have to read the actions accordingly. They're likely not playing hard to get. But the other thing is our feelings of rejection or exclusion are valid, whether they're seen from the other side as misplaced or irrational. And there may be instances where maybe they are misplaced and irrational. But that's the thing about feelings. You feel them in a moment, you have certain perspectives, you have certain maybe expectations or desires, and those desires and expectations are frustrated or thwarted. And, that happens on both sides. So we really need to read between the lines to get at those underlying meanings. So we do this in the writing world. We take what's on the surface, what is given to us, and we could probably tell you, or no, we can tell you a lot more about what's going on behind the scenes or underneath the surface by what's left out. So this is kind of that gut feeling or that sixth sense that you get that you're like, okay, I'm piecing this together. This is what I notice. This is what I sense. And no matter what we're told to think or believe about the situation, we have to trust those instincts. We have to give people a chance. We have to hear people out in those instances and receive what they're saying. But when someone comes to you and says you should feel a particular way about a situation, and I'll get more into this in a few minutes, that's not how it works. You don't get to control how someone else views the situation. You don't just get to control both. You don't get to control what you do in the situation. Maybe you are legitimately excluding a person and they're feeling that sense of rejection, and then you're telling them they don't get to feel a specific way about it. They do, and we'll talk about how to navigate those spaces in a few minutes. So we must think for ourselves, and if we're wrong, we must also allow ourselves to be wrong. That's where we learn. We need to try to better understand something and then fail if it's necessary, and then begin to think for ourselves and sift through our emotional reaction to experiences and learn what we need to learn about ourselves. Most importantly,
in the situation. And if there are those areas where we're not being reasonable or rational, or we just realize that we are not welcome in this space, we need to deal with that. And this kind of reminds me of a lesson that I used to teach in higher ed classrooms when we would talk about, the different chain of events. And so I taught an essay called Cause and Effect and Consequences. And what this, I'm trying to simplify this the simplest way I can, but cause is that why. It's the situation, the motive, the catalyst. Effect is the outcome, what's happened as a result after things are set into motion. And then the consequences are those responses in the wake of the chain of events. It's the impacts on those involved. And so this chain of events can play out like so. Say you have a movie date planned and this big storm comes whipping through and it takes out all the power in the area. And so now the movie theater is no longer open and you have to cancel the date. And then what are the feelings or the emotions that are left in the wake? And, that's kind of a complicated situation because you have one of those instances where that might not be the end all, and you might keep that going saying, okay, so let's find something else to do. And then if that person's not receptive, then that kind of brings us back into maybe they're trying to get out of the plans. Maybe they aren't interested in spending that time with you. Maybe this was a convenient excuse. So that brings us back into this cycle where you can apply some of this thinking that I'm about to get into. But I love this proverb that says everything is permissible, but not everything is wise. So for every situation, you have to think about, yes, you're allowed to do things. You are allowed to exclude people. You are allowed to just do your thing, and you are allowed to have an attitude that you don't owe anybody anything. But on the other side of that, there are other human beings. You can't dehumanize the other human beings involved. And so, you have to question, are the people on the receiving end of that? I mean, it is a sense of exclusion. Maybe you're not intending it to be rejection. It's just an instance of exclusion. And you have to allow that person to have their feelings about it. And if maybe that relationship, maybe you already know that you don't want that relationship to be that deep, but the other person has no idea. And that creates this very interesting dichotomy of now you're skating around some things and perpetuating this cycle of exclusion in a situation where you're not even really interested in having a relationship to that level with the person to begin with. And then on the flip side, you're on the other side of this type of relationship or interaction with someone where you're constantly trying to fit yourself in, like, oh, I could do this. Oh, I could be that. Oh, I would love to do that too. Next time you do that, think of me. And over and over again, you get the, oh, okay, yeah, sure, of course, yeah, yeah, next time, yeah. And then it never happens. And of course, everybody lives their Insta perfect life on social media. So you're constantly being bombarded with the fact that you are, in fact, being excluded in these things over and over and over again. And you have to assess, where does that leave you standing in that situation? And that's another thing that we'll get to in a few minutes. When you think about every situation has at least two sides, right? If there are two individuals there, there could be two sides, minimal, and maybe there's a third side, maybe a situational or an environmental factor that comes into play. But in most cases, these two sides, and there's some kind of validity on each side. Again, you cannot dehumanize another human being because you don't feel like dealing with their emotions and their reactions to a specific choice that you make. You can choose not to argue with them, you can choose not to discuss it with them, but you can choose to never talk to them again. But they're still valid in going through their emotions. We're all valid in going through our emotions. No one's less human than another person. And if you're on the side that's experiencing a sense of rejection or exclusion, make sure you always act with integrity. And then also give others grace and seek to understand. If you're on the side where you have to make a decision to not include someone, act with integrity, give others grace, and seek to understand. As for experiencing a sense of rejection, we must allow people to show us our value and position in their different circles. So we have to be paying attention. We have to read between those lines. Now, we don't want to get carried away with paranoia and misreading. if we have those instances where we are able to talk with someone and we're able to reach out to them, then of course, share your, like, oh, I really hoped that, I could have been included in that, or I really hoped that I could have that type of relationship with you and express those things. But in the end, we cannot control others, just like they cannot control how either of us react and then respond to a situation. It just doesn't work that way. You can control all the things in your perfect life, but you don't get to control the other people. It just that's how it works. So, in my own personal experiences with rejection and exclusion, um, I have so many that provoke this sense of fear of rejection and fear of abandonment and, that kind of FOMO of being left out. I think that's a normal thing, especially when you feel or you believe that you belong and you have a place in these circles and you're constantly overlooked and constantly excluded. It's this very vicious, hurtful, frustrating cycle that you get stuck in. And I know a lot of people who get stuck in this particular cycle. It's why I chose today to change topics. I wasn't going to talk about this because I felt like the universe was just saying, you're coaching two different people on this very topic. And now you have experienced three different instances of this in the very recent past. And on a personal level or where you're talking to a loved one who's experiencing it. And it's like, this has got to be a really common thing that a lot of people maybe are struggling with also. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to talk about this today. I'm kind of in the raw of it. It's kind of on my mind, and I'm kind of thinking fresh about ways to navigate this, ways to really pinpoint, you know, the validity of things going on, where you fit into the situation, and how to move forward and move beyond these things without losing your peace, without losing your character, and without killing your confidence. So in childhood, I had this issue with, lying, little lies. And it eventually made it so that people just didn't trust me. They didn't know how to trust me. It became a thing with my parents. And even though I worked hard to be like, okay, let me clean up my act here, let me work on this, there was like a period of time where the damage was already done. And so it was just always assumed that I was being deceitful or I was lying, even, over the years later when I was like, no, I worked really hard at this. Not to say that I never lied, but I think, like every teenager lies. You go through things, you're not lying about everything, but you're covering up things. A lot of times I found myself covering up things for friends because they had asked me to cover those up. So we justify like, well, that lie isn't really for me. I'm keeping someone else's secret and all the things. But then that would open up old, wounds is not the right word. It would open up old patterns of interactions with my loved ones and with the people who I shared my life with, and friends included. And I had to work really hard to break those cycles and to shape my character with virtue and integrity. And I've put that work in, and now I have gotten to a point where it kind of irritates me when people lie to me. It kind of irritates me when they're looking me in the eye and I've asked them a question and they're lying to me. I deal with this with a lot of people currently in my life, and I try to deal with it as best as I can in those instances where I need to talk with conviction. I talk with conviction. I speak my truth. I call it out. I try to have those conversations about how it's not healthy and all those different things. But when I'm coaching the people that come to me to work through these struggles, the picture of this looks a little bit different. And so I'm currently coaching two people who are struggling with this sense of rejection, and they're feeling really, they're feeling like they're in a place where they're experiencing disloyalty. And of course, that often comes into play in these instances where you're feeling overlooked or you're feeling excluded or you're feeling rejected, in these instances where maybe you believe or maybe you really do have a position in this circle. You have a place that you fit into this circle and you're still experiencing these things. And you are on the other end of where these particular individuals, these are the things, the hot points that they've been sharing with me, the sneaking around and the lying about whatever the situation is. And then, like, they post it on social media anyway later. They post it on their Snapchat story. They post it on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. They're putting it out there. They're taking little reels and putting it out there. And then you're like, oh my God, they told me they couldn't do that because they were sick or, whatever. They were sneaking around, like they're hanging around this person who, in some instances, in one of the instances here, the person has said a lot of negative things about the other individual, and now they're going around sneaking about them and then putting it out there like they're just best buds without any problems in the world. And she's over here like, what the heck? I'm getting whiplash because you were just negative talking that person, and now you're out with them and living your best life. And I have to take you at your word. So when you say things to me, I have to wonder, right, why you would say those things, then go out with these individuals. And then, of course, now you're stuck in the cycle of trying to figure out what their motives are and trying to figure out, you're making judgments, and you're just, again, you're guessing. You're guessing at the reasoning behind it, as if there's a good reason to lie to people. Maybe the other thing that this two of these individuals are dealing with is that dismissive attitude, that it's not personal. Not everything's about you. It's not personal. I was doing my thing, and I just like to spend time with individuals. And hearing that, and again, you're sitting there thinking, oh my God, I thought you weren't even good with that person. And I get it, people make up and stuff like that. But then you have to step back and go, okay, you have been asking me for loyalty in certain ways, and spoken or unspoken. You have kind of expected certain loyalties, and now you're not giving that back. And then you have to step back. In this instance, the thing that I was talking about with both these individuals, and I was thinking about it in my own situation as well, you have to step back and say, okay, like, I'm not willing to give people loyalty that are not willing to give loyalty back to me. And I don't mean like you got to pick me, you can't pick them. That's not really what I'm talking about. Maybe I'll do another episode on what loyalty and committing in relationships looks like or can look like. But I'm talking about where you are keeping people away from each other. Again, you might have motives that you think are legitimate, but then you're sneaking around and you're lying about it, making excuses. And maybe your reason is, well, I just don't want to argue with that person. Well, I mean, do you think that the person isn't going to want to argue with you when they find you in your lie, when they find you sneaking around? So it's like it eventually turns into an argument or a confrontation if that person comes to you. You know, these tend to become re-encounters. They're chronic patterns that you find yourself trapped in. And that's where you really start to question people's loyalty, people's, intentions with their relationship with you. Are they saying and acting the same way because they're telling you you're good? They're telling you, they might be calling you. I know this one of the coaching students, one of the issues is this person constantly comes to her and just dumps all these things. So she's the good listener friend. And maybe she gives her good advice, or maybe she's just like listening and relating and validating her. And then, who wants to just have that role? She's not a therapist. She's the farthest thing from a therapist. And so who wants to just be the person that someone just dumps everything on, and then you don't get any of the fun stuff or any of the meaningful stuff reciprocated, or any depth in a relationship beyond that. So then you have to decide, like, what's your capacity? What's your role in this relationship and these interactions? And are you willing to just be that person that's just a garbage dump? They're just going to be that thing. And you have to choose that. All right, what are you going to settle for if you see those types of patterns? And so that's what I've been talking about with the one student, saying you need to you need to reconsider this. And so, you know, the other individual that I was talking to, I felt like, oh my gosh, me too. Like, oh my gosh, I have experienced this so many times. And so I wrote a couple of them down because I was like, these are literally, it's almost like they're scripted things that people say to you when you are like, "Ah, I told you I wanted to be involved in these things," or how come you're not including me in these things? It doesn't make any sense. They say things like, I didn't know you were interested. I know how busy you are, so I didn't want to bother you. We honestly didn't even think of you when we were planning this. Or the after the fact questions, when you finally know you were left out or rejected, are the same chronic things. And so I thought that was really interesting. Uh, to see those, almost scripted, cliche kind of things that people say to you. So it was like, it kind of was very validating for me when I was hearing that, because as much as my heart broke for the young lady who I was talking to, I felt really connected. I felt like, okay, because we can internalize these experiences and feel like, well, maybe we merited them, or you start to feel like you're going crazy and like, am I not communicating myself? And am I not worthy of being accepted? And, what's wrong that they don't include me in these things? And you start to really internalize it if you allow it to run away with your thoughts. And a lot of times it has absolutely nothing to do with you. But recently, when this stirred up, I got a couple of messages in, like in the near past from people who noticed some things, and they're like, "Hey, I thought things were good with you and so, like, and I'm like, yeah, they're right. Wow. Well, I mean, they're doing stuff, and it just seems like I'm surprised you weren't there with them. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I don't know why I wasn't. I said to them, I did put myself out there again. And yet, when this next thing came up, I was still excluded. I was still overlooked. And again, I have to say, clearly people are showing me and not telling me where I fit and where I don't fit into their lives. And I have to accept that and then move on. And like the saying goes, find my people, because there are people who want to be around us. There are people out there who are really excited and really passionate about you and spending time with you, and you have got to fill your beautiful life with those people. So I want to talk a minute, though, about lying and how it damages both parties. So, this is, again, I just said, like, I worked really hard on that. And because I've been seeing a lot of that lying, again, my own experience where people look you right in the eye and they just bold-faced lie to you, and it's different individuals too. So it's like, it feels very conspiracy, like they all are aware of, you're not included in this thing. And instead of just being honest, they lie for maybe different reasons, but it doesn't matter, because the person who lies is actually weakening their own self-esteem and confidence, regardless of their motives or reason. So that's the really interesting thing. They might do damage if you allow them a lot of real estate for free in your inner space. They might do damage to your confidence and your self-esteem, but they clearly do it to themselves. And so we've got a lot of people who are walking around with this broken self-esteem and broken confidence that they bring on themselves by being in a perpetual state of deception and sneakiness and lying. And again, it doesn't matter what their motives are. Lying destroys relationships. It doesn't just destroy your self-esteem and confidence. It destroys relationships because it kills trust, it kills respect and integrity, and it operates in deceit. There's no way around it. And I'm not talking about like maybe you're trying to spare someone and you're just like, okay, I don't have time to set this all up, and you just say, I'm really sorry, I can't make it because blah blah blah. And I'm not saying like, oh, there's good lies and bad lies, but I'm saying I get it. Sometimes people lie because it is easier than setting the whole thing up and getting into an argument where you're just like, look, I really can't make it, and it's just easier for me to simplify it this way or say it that way. These aren't even the types of lies that I'm talking about. The types of lies I'm talking about are the ones where you know that it's operating in deceit once it's eventually exposed, and it just makes people second guess their own perceptions, and it leads to hurt feelings and all the emotions that stem out of those hurt feelings. And you're left there speculating again, what are the reasons? And you're internalizing it, and you're trying to take responsibility, and you're trying to do all those things, which sometimes there are instances where you need to take responsibility. Maybe you drive people crazy. Maybe you're always negative or something. I'm just picking something. People are like, I can't stand being around negative people. That's another area where I've had to really work at. It's okay to sometimes share some of the struggles that you're going through, but don't stay stuck in a constant state of negativity when you're in people's presence, because they get tired of being that way. So then, yes, there might be an instance where people are like, oh, we can't bring that individual because she always makes it about her. She's always really negative. Those are those things. So you have to self-reflect. I don't want to say don't internalize it like you're always spot free. You have to self-reflect and think about like, are there instances or legitimate reasons? And sometimes people tell you. It's not all about like they lie. There might be other instances. They might have lied to you by, telling you in this instance, yeah, no, no, we're not doing anything. And then you see later that they did do something, or you hear months later, remember that surprise birthday party trip that we took? And you're like, what? Because maybe they don't post the pictures because they don't want you to see and they don't want you to get hurt and it comes out in a different way. And then you're like, wait a minute, what happened? And then you start to think back, oh my gosh, I remember last time we took a destination vacation together and we got in an argument because I'm always negative or it's always about me and I turned it into a counseling session for me and no one, so it's like, maybe. And then that might be an opportunity where you go back if the relationship is worth something and you talk to that person and you say, all right, wait a minute. All right, I see this happen. Let's talk. Again, are you confronting people about being left out? Or are you confronting people about trying to salvage relationships? You really got to pick because one's just super petty and it's not going to be very productive, and one is constructive. So you need to live like a person who's a powerhouse, who's trying to restore that inner world, who's trying to build a beautiful life full of purpose and passion and strong self-esteem and confidence. You have to live the latter life. Okay, so you can't be just, you have to be thinking about how do I rebuild things? How do I mend things? You have to be thinking with that mindset, period. No matter what side you're on of it as well. So that coming back to seeking to understand other people, you know, if that relationship is valuable to you and you find yourself constantly excluding a person and it's creating this constant resentment, this constant strife in this, this circle, everybody has different circles of relationships that extend beyond just the two individuals maybe that are, one's planning and one's, saying yes or no, you're in, you're out, that kind of a thing. It's bigger than that. And so you have to decide if you're going to salvage those things. You have to decide, what does the state of this relationship look like? Are we going to have a relationship outside of this situation? And what is that going to look like moving forward? So getting back to the lying thing, lying creates obstacles or barriers, whether you get caught or not. So even if you don't get caught, it still creates this obstacle, this awkwardness, this, if you've ever been around a person and like something's off, but you haven't seen them or you haven't talked to them, and then you're like, the last time we got together, you're like, they were kind of standoffish or whatever. They didn't want to get together. They're busy. And then you start to think like, okay, is there kind of this dishonesty that's now making them uncomfortable to be around you because now they're like, oh crap, I got to watch what I say or what did I say? Got to remember your lies and keep your story straight, right? And a lot of people just are so spontaneous with their lies and impulsive that they don't even remember what their lies were to different people, and it's hard for them to keep them straight, obviously. But you have to keep one thing in mind. If you base interactions on lies, it's like building a sandcastle and hoping to live in it like it's your home. I mean, just think about a sandcastle. I don't care if you put a little glue in the sand, it's still sand at the end of the day. And when it's on that beach, there's going to be weather, there's going to be rain, there's going to be wind, there's going to be high tide, there's going to be all these different things. There's going to be the sun drying it out, and it's going to crack, and there's going to be kids running by and maybe hitting it, and all these things. It is not built to last. Sandcastles are not built to last. And so you can't build relationships and interactions on deception and lies. It's not, and you're not building it to last. You can do it, but those are temporary situations that are going to crumble. And, if you're after these long-term relationships, these fulfilling relationships, don't build sandcastles. So now back to the coaching session that opened up an important conversation about dealing with deception, loyalty, and lack thereof. When we were talking, something came up and I said, well, I'm not a psychotherapist, but I do have over 2 decades of experience life coaching others in this very area. And I started talking about how I'm a professional writer and it's my job to read situations and read people. Like I do that for a living. And one of the things that writers do is we read and study behavioral patterns. It's in our wheelhouse. And so we started talking about how that works in the writing world and how that can be applied to personal interests just as much as these professional interests that I was sharing with them. And so I have a couple of tips that have stemmed from my own experience, my trials and errors, my struggles and then ultimate triumphs, things that, I tried, tested, they worked, and some of the things that I talk about in some of my other writings. And so tip number one is when you're faced with interactions that don't go as you hoped, you need to pull out your survival guide and get that little Q&A little notebook out, like I'm talking figuratively, but it's that thing that has the checklist, and it's that thing like a detective where now you have to assess the outcome of the situation, which might go something like this. Did I notice any chronic patterns? If so, I have to dissect their meanings. So, is there a similar excuse or exchange that happens each time I interact with this individual? Are there other circumstances I'm aware of? Is it necessary or important to me to approach the other person and talk about things and get better clarity and better understandings to have them understand my perspective better? Are there boundaries within this interaction that need to exist? And if so, are they in place? Are they being dismissed or ignored? Is it possible this person doesn't want the same things from me? Are they lying to save face? Remember, this will always have an effect on the receiver and the consequences that stem from this. So when you lie to someone, you have to know that. You have to know it. So you have to make the decision, what kind of integrity are you going to have in your character? So if you lie to someone and you know most likely it's going to come out, then you don't care about the trust between the two of you. You're making a conscientious decision to not care. You don't care. You don't care if they understand you, and that's your prerogative. You're entitled to not be trusted. You're entitled to not care about how your actions affect other people. You're entitled to only be concerned about how things affect you and your little circle, but there are still consequences to those things. There is still the other side. Time will, like I said, always has a way of showing the truth, and you should believe and receive it when you do have it placed in your lap. Time usually has a way of showing us the truth, and we should believe and receive it when it does. We have to be open to that. It's important to reevaluate loyalty and a lack thereof in relationships. So when you're going through this assessment and you're in that Q&A and you're the detective, you need to be looking at these things. How deep do you imagine things will ever be if there is a chronic exclusion, deception, um, unresolved things that you need to discuss if, again, you both want the same thing out of the relationship? Is loyalty a factor or possibility in this interaction or relationship? You can't come to every single thing and be like, oh, they're disloyal. Maybe that's not even a factor. So you need to kind of evaluate that. Don't try to stamp that on everything. It's not a one size fit all label. So tip number two, don't sell yourself out or stoop to anyone's level. So you have to remember who you are and who you aspire to be as you journey toward your ultimate goals and desires. So we cannot sell ourselves out or match people's negative energy, or maybe negative's not the right word. We can't match the energy that we do not want to exemplify. We have a certain character that we say, this is how I will act. These are the desires that I have. This is the character I want to be or I want to continue to grow into. And then we have to stay the course. So we have to stay true to our commitment to ourselves. So we cannot match these things, these behaviors, or one up and stoop to levels where we are now behaving in the very ways that we don't want to tolerate from other people, or we certainly don't want to be this kind of poison in our own system. We don't want that. So you need to make that conscientious decision to not match the energy. You have to decide to cap the amount of times that you communicate your hurts and desires to others. Okay? Same with calling out deceptions or lies. There will be a time where you just are done confronting it over and over and over again. It's like the first time it happens, shame on them. The second time, shame on you. Third, shame on you. Even though it's shame on them because they keep doing the same thing, at some point you have to decide, like, it's them. They are doing it. I'm not reading this wrong. And you need to decide how many times you're going to cap it and how you're going to then reimagine if you even have to have a relationship with that person or desire to have a relationship or continue to have interactions with that individual, what that's going to look like. So, what you're going to tolerate, what those boundaries are going to be. I talked about boundaries in the previous episode. You might not go back to that person and say, these are my boundaries, this, that, this, that. You might have to communicate as you go. You may not communicate at all. You just know what your boundaries are. I have a loved one who's like, I don't have to communicate my boundaries with people. When I know what I just won't tolerate and I see that quality in a person, I know that's going to be something dominant in our interactions, in our relationship if we take things to the next level. And I'm not interested. I know I can't change people, so I'm not interested. That's not my people. That's not the person for me. And that's something that I love and admire because sometimes it's hard to make that decision to do that. It's bold, it's scary because, let's face it, it's hard to meet people out there these days. And then when you start to feel like I have a connection with this person, I'm not just talking about romantic relationships either. I'm talking about just companionship and friendship and, possible dating partners and all those. They can put them into one umbrella where you're like, oh my God, it's so hard. I don't want to cut this person out right away. It's been great talking to them for the last 2 weeks and maybe meeting for coffee or going shopping or doing things that you love to do together. And then boom, you see this quality, or maybe you've noticed it before, but now it's like blatant and you have to deal with it. And you're like, this not a thing. It's right. It's beyond my boundaries. I shouldn't even have to communicate this to someone. And maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong. Doesn't matter. It's you. It's your decision. You say, nope, this is not going any farther. You have to make those bold, tough decisions to protect your space, to protect your peace, to protect your future, to protect your self-esteem and your confidence and everything moving forward. Because again, just like deception weakens your confidence and self-esteem, so does not having and honoring your own boundaries. Those things then make you start to operate like you're just a doormat. Everybody can just walk all over you. And that's counterintuitive to what we're trying to do here, which is strengthen and rebuild the broken areas of our self-confidence and self-worth. So again, you need to decide how much real estate certain individuals get to take up for free in your inner world. You've got this big list of people that might exist in your life. You might have immediate family that you're not going to write off, or a spouse or kids that are in your life. You might also have friends and extended family members and coworkers and people in your community, or there's just different people that you're like, okay, I don't have to live with this person. So I don't necessarily have to give them a lot of real estate in my mind. And I don't necessarily have to fix things in this relationship because I'm committed to this person for the long run. I have a lot invested in this person. So you have to decide how much real estate they're going to get. And here's an interesting thing about me. And this is something that came up in the last coaching session that I was sharing with my student, is that you have to know the moment that I stop calling out my feelings of rejection, exclusion, or start saying, that's a lie, like, why did you lie to me, is the moment I've cut you out of my inner circle. So you might lie and I'm looking at you and I'm kind of nodding along, and in my head I'm like, oh my God, that person is lying to me right now. I cannot believe it. That is just awful. But I might not show it, or I might show it. My face sometimes just is very animated, and I might show it. You might see that I can see that woundedness, like, I can't believe you just lied to me about something so stupid or so small. A lot of times that's what it is too. It's just ridiculous. Small, little, tiny things. And the moment that I stop saying something to you about it is the moment you're cut out, and you may never get back in. If that makes me sound like a sociopath, so be it, because I have to protect my peace, my self-esteem, and my confidence. And I invite you to do the same because you're the only one that can do that. No one else can do it for you. So tip number 3 is you have to grieve the instances where you feel rejected or not received. And that could be just a perceived thing, or it can be an actual thing where you are were in fact rejected. But you have to grieve those instances, regardless of where they fall. If they turn out to be real or they're just perceived. I go through these 8 stages of grief in Warrior Sister Cut Yourself Free, and I'm bringing them in a little bit of a revised way into the Restore Your Inner Warrior book that's under development right now. But these stages of grief, I'll just briefly mention them again. There's links below if you want to get to the book, and you can see the grief stages and a little bit more of an explanation inside the book of what each means. But there's shock and denial, pain, recall, guilt and shame, anger, depression, hope and acceptance, and recovery. So you can see there's like, some of them start to create a momentum as we're leading ultimately toward this place of hope and acceptance. And that doesn't mean that you're just making peace with bad things happening to you, or it's a different form of hope and acceptance. You are coming to a place of closure and making peace. And that idea of recovery as the last step is okay. You make it through, but the work is not done because sometimes some of the other grief stages will rear their ugly head again and again, and they might not come in a certain order, and you might not experience them all. But you can see when I name them off, there are very relatable ones in there, and they're not all the same. So a lot of times when we say the word grief, we think like this is just to cry it out real hard, maybe not get out of bed for a day or a morning, and binge eat ice cream and watch a Netflix series. And really, like, I guess that's a good coping mechanism. But I'm talking about the meaningful stuff because, again, we're after rebuilding our character. We're after rebuilding our inner world and fixing those broken areas and striving toward that life of, powerful self-esteem and confidence. And that looks a little different. There's a little work involved in that. And so going through that grief process is really powerful, though, because when you do it, you do resolve a lot of those emotions. And there's a real sense of completeness and closure that happens when you go through that. And so, what might this process look like? Well, you might need to just get it out of your system. And I know it might sound like, oh, that's too simple, but sometimes journaling it in a notebook or out on a piece of paper or in your notes app or dictating it to your phone in a voice memo, sometimes just getting it out there gives you psychic distance for one. And what I mean by that is the moment you get it out of your head and you put it into a new space, you immediately see it in a different way because you're seeing it inside here with a different vision. And now you're looking at it and reading it. And yeah, it's the same stuff, but you're able to see it from a different perspective. That is why the research shows that journaling is powerful. That's one of the reasons that it shows that journaling is super powerful. So it gives you this larger perspective. And then you can repeat the journaling process if and when you notice certain things that you're like, oh, I should talk about that more. Clearly, I'm tapping into this and I'm tapping into that. And oh my gosh. And then you can also share these things with a therapist, with a trusted friend, with a school counselor, or a mentor, or a loved one that you trust. And you can also take it to God in prayer. Like, don't underestimate if you're a faith person. I have that as the last thing, but if you're a faith person, it's probably one of the first things you should do. And you can even shout about it out loud. I do all the time. So part of that getting it out, even if I'm not writing it down, I am getting it out. I'm getting it out because so much is just this toxic, just garbage and these feelings, and they make you feel horrible. And so I get it out and I talk. Sometimes I raise my voice. I'm angry. I'm frustrated. I'm going through all those different grief processes. And I'm with the most trusted companion, the most forgiving and understanding companion. And I remember years ago when I was sharing that with a friend, that, oh yeah, sometimes I like scream in prayer. And, sometimes I even say I'm so frustrated with God because he's like keeps allowing me to go into this particular thing, or why haven't you delivered me from this? Or why do I have to keep going through this same thing and I get frustrated? Or why don't you just tell me what you want me to do or whatever? And people are like, I can't believe you talk to God that way. And I say, first of all, God already hears my thoughts. He already knows I'm a wreck. He already knows I'm frustrated with him not doing what I want him to do. Does it make it right or wrong? But no, me admitting it out loud isn't telling him anything he doesn't already know. Me yelling about it isn't like offending him. I'm not calling him names. I'm not blaspheming him. I am sharing a part of my frustration that is a very cathartic part of my healing process. It's very powerful. And once I get that out, a lot of times I'm eventually later on going through that kind of moment of remorse where then I'm like, okay, I'm sorry that I lost my cool and I seemed impatient. And then it gives me that opportunity to have a different conversation with God. But I take those things and I come as myself. And God made me this way. I'm a feisty person. And so I come as myself because He already knows that's how I am. And when I'm a wreck or I feel attacked or I feel vulnerable, that looks a little different. And He already knows it. Again, why do I have to come and be like, okay, let me pretend I'm somebody else? He's the only person. I don't have to censor myself and pretend I'm somebody else. He already knows. He knows everything. So I just want to, maybe you needed to hear that today. I'm not saying everybody should go around and start screaming at God. That's not what I mean, but screaming to God. I see it as a form of lamenting. And I'm sure that's what people mean when they're lamenting. Maybe you will have tears with yours. Maybe you won't. Maybe you won't be able to utter words. All you're uttering are sounds. I say they're all laments. And so you take that, those hurts, and you get them out because once you get them out, step number two, next you get to look back on this process of getting it out. And now you can sift through whatever you notice and discover. So now you've got to kind of sit down, figuratively speaking, crisscross applesauce, and you're taking things off the paper like, okay, here's this, here's that, and you're trying to make sense of it all. So you're looking for, what am I noticing about myself? What am I noticing about these other individuals, about the situation, about the chronic patterns? What are my ultimate goals and desires that I hope that like we have in common? Or maybe we don't have in common. And I realize that as I'm looking at it, like I have different goals and desires, or that person has different goals and desires. And now what the heck do I do with that? You have to do something with it. You can't keep going along and trying to force yourself into situations and interactions and relationships where you don't even want the same outcomes. That doesn't make any sense. Now you just want to be included just to be included. And maybe it sucks. Maybe you want to be included and they just don't want to include you. And it's horrible and it makes no sense and you don't deserve it. Again, you've got to go through the process of making peace with that. You've got to go through the grief process. And you also have to consider, are there areas that you need to maybe make correction and changes in your life? You have to think about those things. Step number three, develop an action plan moving forward. You need new boundaries? Write them down. You need to think about what those might be. Here you are. You're looking at everything, you're sifting everything through. You're not just sitting down and starting with step three. Oh, I think I need to write new boundaries. Because a lot of times you'll start to do that in anger. And then you'll come up with these very irrational, weird, harsh boundaries where you're like, okay, nobody can live up to those standards. Who the heck wants to be your friend or be close to you to have any type of working interactions with you when you have this weird boundary list of things and expectations? So don't go to it first. Often you'll be in one of those grieving processes. And a lot of times it's anger. Anger drives us to be like, you know what? I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen again. And then we take that in. But if you're going through the step one and step two, first and doing a lot of those mini steps in between, by the time you get to step three, you're a little calm, you're a little collected, you have much more insights into the situation, into yourself. And even if you don't know what to do with them yet, you come to step three and you're like, okay, now I'm going to say, do I need new boundaries? What should those look like? How do I know what those should look like? And you're looking back into your findings. You need to look at the interaction, the relationship with that person. You need to say, do we even have a future? What will this future look like? And what capacity will it be? Is the relationship important, necessary, long-term, temporary? Remember, we've got to go back to that. Is it a spouse or a parent or a child that you share a house with? Is it extended family, friends, coworkers, someone within the community, a peer from school? What is that person? That is a deciding factor. Is a distance relationship the only thing that will bring you together occasionally? So if you have to see this person just at bigger family events, for instance, it could be a friend of the family that you've known your whole lifetime. This person's like a cousin, or it could be even a sibling or an aunt or a niece or nephew, or I'm not naming everybody, but it could be somebody who's kind of feels like, well, they're kind of, maybe not immediate family, but they're close family. It's a first cousin. And then you still have to decide, like, I'm still going to have to deal with this person. I'm not going to write my whole family off because I don't, because things are awkward with this person now. And so, what is that distance? I call that a distance relationship. What is that distance relationship going to look like when we are brought together for these particular things? You need to have a plan. You need to know how you're going to do it. Even if you don't communicate with that person, I don't think you're going to call that person up like, okay, all right, here's the deal. We're going to have to see each other in the future, and this is how it's going to go. That's a weird conversation to have. Some people may have to have those conversations, like, for instance, if you get divorced and you have children, and now you're going to have to, like, go to graduations, and you're both going to have to deal with each other and go to, have, oh my God, throw a wedding, throw a big party for that child or your joint children, and then you might have to communicate those things. But not every situation is going to have those types of interactions where you have to set ground rules, like this is how we're going to behave in these spaces because we hate each other, but we have to still be there for our kids. So, is there peace that we need to make with this person so that our future interactions are less awkward? We need to make those decisions. We need to be aware of it. Here's another thing, and I see this so much, and sometimes I just laugh because I'm like, dear God. We make fun of my husband, for instance, as he's not the one who does this, but I see other people doing it. We make fun of my husband because we say he wants everybody to be on his ship. He wants everybody to validate him and his side of things, and he's very into like loyalty in the sense that you have to understand my perspective, and I want you to be on my side. I want to be the winner here. And so we're constantly saying to him, be really careful where you look for that validation. And so I think about how people you know take things to social media all the time, and it's baffling to me because it's really destructive, and it's very one-sided, and it's very jaded. And you have to be careful when you're seeking validation in these ways because another person's feelings and reputation are affected when you interpret a situation strictly from your own perspective. And then even if you're talking in vagaries, you're saying vaguely, blah, 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 people kind of can try to figure it out, or the person you're talking about is like feels now defensive, like, wait a minute, that is not at all, you're not representing the right context here. You don't even know why I feel the way I feel because you didn't give me the time of day to have that conversation or whatever. There's 1,000 different things that can be in play here, but it's so disheartening when I see that happen because I always tell myself, and I always told my kids growing up, you know there's another side to things. And there are a lot of instances where people are just rotten and the other person is just representing, like, yes, this experience was with a rotten person. I'm really just representing the facts, nothing but the facts. But I'm talking about these posts or these reels, these TikToks that are just giving you the story time of their experience, and they're giving it from their very one-sided perspective, making sometimes ill-informed judgments and interpretations and not giving that person the benefit of the doubt, and just making that person ultimately feel like another layer of rejection. And again, going back to what I said earlier, you need to take them at that face value too. So if they're out there broadcasting, all this negative stuff, and darn well they're talking about you and they're totally misreading or misrepresenting to make their point, your integrity or your character or just, the situation, then you have to read between the lines there and trust that what they're showing you is the truth and how they view you. And maybe you don't have a future with that person. And then if that fills you with more grief and more, emotional turmoil, you need to go and you need to deal with those things. They're very valid, reactions. You have to deal with them. You have to deal with the consequences of that cause and effect. You have to go back and you have to deal with that because you have to find closure. Even if you don't get to talk to the other person about it, you have to find closure. There are people you will never get to talk to about these things because you're just like, okay, we're done. Maybe they write you off, they cut you off, they ghost you, they cancel you, and you're like, okay, blocked. Clearly, I don't get to talk to them again. And so now you have to figure out how are you going to make peace with that and move on? How are you not going to let it steal any more of your peace? Because clearly, when you get to this point, it has taken some of your peace. It has robbed you of some of your peace. It has robbed you of some of your happiness, some of your stability, your confidence, your value, and rightfully so in a lot of instances. So the ultimate objective is to salvage these relationships that you realize are worth doing so, and be willing to admit when it's time to cut yourself free from trying to fit yourself into places you aren't even welcome. And trust me, when you put the time into these steps that I presented to you today, you will better see when people have no intention and have made it very clear that you're not welcome in their circle. You'll know. You'll know. You trust that you can read into these situations and you can take what they're showing you in multiple, you can trust that you can take what you're learning as they show you and model those behaviors that you probably are not accepted at that table. And to use my favorite go-to saying of the year, stop wasting your time where it isn't valued. And for the love of God, get out there and find your people. I need to make t-shirts that say that. Get out there and find your people. Trust me, your people are out there. There are other people who are like-minded, who have the same interests, who are going to love you, even for your flaws and your little ticks and nuances. They're going to love you, and you're going to love them. And so you got to keep getting yourself out there and finding your people. You've got to be willing to say enough is enough when you're not getting accepted and the rejection is chronic, and invest that time into things that come back tenfold. This reminds me of a really simple parable, that proverb that says you reap what you sow. So you can plant good seeds or you can plant bad seeds. And maybe there's all different kinds of seeds, but today we're just going to talk about there's good seeds and bad seeds. And the good seeds produce a good harvest. The bad seeds, a rotten harvest. And so you planted the harvest you planted the seeds because you want a good harvest. You want to eat. You want to sustain your household. You don't want to have to go out, or maybe you can't afford then to go out if you plant a rotten crop. How are you going to eat? You can't afford to go out and buy all new food. That was your source. And so you have to think about when you're building relationships, you want to sow good seeds because you want to reap a great crop. Period. That's how you're going to cultivate and nurture your best life.
Well, girl, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, don't forget to follow my channel and share it with girlfriends who also want to restore their self-worth and confidence. Also, if this podcast inspired you, consider leaving a 5-star written review on Apple Podcasts. And as you go through your day, may your empowered spirit, heart, and mind guide you. Catch new episodes every Tuesday and Friday. Ciao.